Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today's episode is another local New England case coming out of Dartmouth, Massachusetts. I stumbled upon this one through Investigation Discovery when a disappeared episode caught my attention. There's not a whole lot of information out there on this one, and with no recent coverage, I felt it important to tell you this story. Now listen carefully. Today's case is about the mysterious disappearance of Charlie Allen Jr. Charlie Allen Jr. was an avid online gamer back in high school, so much so that he even became internet famous for it. And being internet famous back in the early 2000s was serious. It's not like today where everyone and their brother is an Instagram influencer and they're all known by their online username. No, Charlie worked his butt off to become successful online. His gamer tag, Neo, was how people in the online community knew him, and he had become a pro at the game Half-Life. Now, ask me if I know what that game is? Absolutely not. I am definitely not a gamer. John here, however, when I told him about this guy's online name and the video games he was into, he was like, oh yeah, I know that game. Oh yeah, Neo's from The Matrix, right?
Well, come on. Every guy around my age knows who Neo is. The Matrix was huge when it came out. And Half-Life, it's one of those things that I know about but never played. I did dabble with the sequel, though, and I think it was a first-person shooter with, like, puzzle elements to it. I assume that if it went pro, that it probably had some type of multiplayer component to it, like Team Deathmatch or something. Probably like Quake.
Oh, yeah. Like Quake. Right. Let's move on before we bore the listeners. I doubt you're all here for video game content. Anyway, back to Charlie. He was the type of kid that wanted to be a pro at everything he did. Hence why he became so popular online playing Half-Life. He worked hard to get the status of one of the best in the world at this game. He'd even traveled to Texas in the past for some tournament, and that's where he received his title of one of the top players. Charlie would head to college in 2004 and chose to attend UMass Dartmouth in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, which, like I mentioned before, is practically right next door to where we live. It's just insane how many cases have happened right in our backyard that we've never heard of. It's a shame they haven't gotten the attention they deserve. Charlie would continue playing games online during college, but once he enrolled, he discovered a newfound passion: tennis. I know, big difference between online gaming and sports, but hey, Charlie was good at everything he tried. Gee, John, that sounds an awful lot like you, huh?
Yeah, you know, jack of all trades, master of none.
Do you know how annoying it is to be married to someone who is literally good at everything they do? Except for bananagrams, though. That's my game.
Yeah, because you're a cheater.
I am not a cheater. But I digress. Back to our story. The things that Charlie was passionate about, oh man, did he push himself to not only be good at them, but he wanted to excel. He wanted to be the best at them. So he spent hours and hours practicing his new hobby and became really great at it. He would make a ton of new friends and just overall enjoyed this time in his life. Not only did he have a passion for tennis, but he was also in his senior year of college and getting ready to take on the world after graduation. He was studying psychology and even considered going to medical school once he finished his undergrad. This kid had some serious dreams and aspirations, and I admire him so much for that. So he was just about done with college and living in his own off-campus apartment in 2007 when our story really begins. The day before Charlie would disappear, he traveled to Providence, Rhode Island to visit his sister Brittany. I know, twins, but just know anytime I mention Brittany, it's 100% about his sister, not me. They spent the morning together, had lunch, and at one point, Charlie met up with his mother. The women are both quoted in the disappeared episode, Game Over, as having said he acted totally normal and that they had no reason to believe that this would be the last time they would ever see him. The next day is October 11th, 2007. Charlie would make plans with his buddy Mason to practice tennis on campus. He was a pretty good player and had even trained at tennis academies down in Florida. Mason was not only a good friend in general, but also really helpful with the sport Charlie wanted to go pro with. While hanging out and playing tennis, Charlie told his friend he wanted to hit up a party that one of the female tennis players at UMass had invited him to. Mason was totally game for it, and they made plans to meet back up at campus together around 8:30 that evening to head over to the party. Later that night, before Charlie was supposed to meet back up with Mason, Brittany calls her brother. She'd gone on Facebook to message him and noticed that his account was deleted. Strange, she thought. So she called him up to ask what was going on. Charlie responded saying that he had no idea how that happened and that he certainly did not delete the account. Brittany goes on to say that Charlie seemed normal at the beginning of their phone call, but became stressed when she asks him about his Facebook. He then goes on to divulge that he's in trouble, that he sent a slew of incriminating emails and that people were after him and their family. Brittany is adamant that Charlie sounded terrified, that she knew he was being serious based on the sound of his voice. You see, Brittany and Charlie were super close. They were only 15 months apart in age, so they practically grew up doing all the same things and going through all the same milestones together. They were best friends, and she knew her brother better than anyone. So when she heard him say this, she knew something was off. Before Charlie hung up the phone, he would tell her one last thing that has thrown everyone off for years. He said, "All the answers are in the periodic table of elements," and ends the call. Brittany is unable to get in touch with him again after this, and all future calls made to Charlie would just go to voicemail. Okay, that's certainly a strange way to end a phone call. I'm going to have to brush up on my periodic table knowledge because, man, I haven't looked at that since high school.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear that, I immediately think that it's like a quote from a movie or a book or something. But then I thought about Half-Life. You know, he was so involved in it. And the fact that there's a lot of science-based stuff in those games. So a quick internet search comes up with a YouTube video titled, "Let's Play Half-Life Part 5, Blurry Periodic Table of Elements." Well, in the thumbnail, you can see someone standing in front of a huge, blurry table of elements on the wall. It makes me wonder, is there any link here?
I'm sorry, but are you kidding me? I didn't even think to go there. I'm like instantly going towards like the science-based periodic table. So what's on this periodic table? Can you tell? Like, my mind is reeling with what this could mean.
Well, the title of the video is accurate because it's quite blurry. But it doesn't look like your standard periodic table. I mean, the shape of it and the colors and stuff look similar, but it looks like there's symbols on it more so than, you know, your typical letters and then whatever is underneath it.
Damn. I wonder if there's like any Reddit sleuths out there that have like dived deep into this. I'd be curious if we could like tie it in any way rather than like your typical elements, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the internet's a crazy place where a lot of people can do some amazing things, but this thing's pretty blurry. I don't know if you could really turn it into anything.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be a rabbit hole to dive down that doesn't even mean anything. At this point, no one knows where Charlie is. Everyone is trying to reach him, but all calls go to voicemail. And Mason? He's left sitting in the UMass Dartmouth parking lot waiting for Charlie to show up. He said he waited about 30 to 45 minutes for Charlie to arrive before leaving without him. He figured something came up and didn't think too much about it. I mean, I feel like we always say this, but you never know how someone will react in any given situation, especially one like this, but maybe I'm just a different kind of friend. It's 2007. You have cell phones. You can 100% call or text someone and ask what's up. I don't know if Mason did or didn't do that, so I'm not placing any blame, but if my friend and I made plans and they just didn't show up, alarm bells would be going off like you'd never believe. Like, if me and my best friend had plans to go to dinner, she never showed, you bet your ass I am calling Lindsay's mom and saying, where the heck is she? Why is she not answering me? I mean, I don't know, it's probably just me and my nervous ways, but like, I guess my mind never goes to the innocent answer first. I'm definitely always worried it's like something more sinister.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he tried to get a hold of him before heading out. And you know me, like, I have the patience of a saint, but when it comes to waiting for somebody, it's the complete opposite. I'm like a caged animal. I'm pacing back and forth, looking out the window every 3 seconds.
Yep, that's you.
I'd be blowing up their phone once they're a few minutes late. But if my phone calls were going right to voicemail, like you, I'd probably try to reach out to somebody else to see if they know where they're at.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't want to make it seem like I don't think Mason actually did that, because I don't know. And I guess I'm just like that crazy person who's going to be like, oh, I'm calling your mom, or I'm calling your spouse. And even if you end up showing up later, like, what's the worst that I did? I called your mom? I just feel like it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, people know what they're getting with you already anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, Charlie's family knows something's up right away, so at least no time is lost there. Charlie's dad would actually mention in that same disappeared episode that Charlie had taken off a few times in the past, but would always be in touch later the same day or the next, so they figured this might just be a similar situation. They kept their phones nearby, ready and waiting for Charlie's call, but it would never come. Charlie's family would get in touch with UMass Dartmouth and let them know that he was missing. And this is another thing that I find really odd. Why would you alert the campus and not town police? Is that like a common thing to do? Do campus police report to the town police, like anything like this? Because honestly, in this case, that's not what happens.
I mean, I don't really have an issue with them calling campus police. I mean, Charlie was last seen playing tennis with Mason, which happened on campus. They'd most likely be the first to look for him in that area because they're the ones patrolling it. Once notifying campus PD, though, I mean, his family could have called municipal police, or maybe campus PD said that they would pass the word along or something like that.
Well, 3 days after Charlie would go missing, Dartmouth police were called and sent to an individual's home in town that had located a backpack left in their backyard. When police open up the backpack to check out what's inside, they find some school supplies and a contact name on them. The name listed is Charles Allen. Okay, now things are starting to get real fishy. How did Charlie's backpack end up in some random person's yard? It's at this point that we discovered Dartmouth PD had no idea that Charlie Allen Jr. was a missing person, and they only figure it out once they contact UMass Dartmouth Campus PD to ask about the belongings they found.
So I guess Campus PD didn't spread the word, which is pretty shitty of them. Not sure what their protocol is, but you'd think they'd at least make a phone call about it when they find out that somebody might be missing.
I know, it sucks, but Dartmouth PD wastes no time and they begin their search.
Yeah, but what do we say about the first 48 hours in an investigation? It's now 3 days later.
For sure. It's definitely a slow start, which isn't good, but they bring out the bloodhounds and start tracking. They're looking for any clues or property to lead them to Charlie. Dartmouth PD comes up empty-handed and don't have much to go on until Campus PD locate Charlie's car. It's sitting in the UMass Dartmouth parking lot, unattended, and with no signs that he's been there recently. It does appear, though, that someone had been sleeping in the 99 Ford Expedition. There was a pillow and blanket set up in the back seat. It's unknown if Charlie had been crashing there for some reason, but he had an off-campus apartment in New Bedford, so why would he be sleeping in his car? Things aren't adding up.
Yeah, that's a bit strange. I guess it's possible that someone else could have been taking advantage of a car being left there and maybe they slept in it, but that's a serious stretch. I'm thinking that maybe Charlie had a pillow and blanket in the car, probably to like nap between classes or something.
Oh, true. Yeah. Like I said before, I guess I just always go worst case scenario first, but you're probably right. Usually simplest answer is correct.
Occam's razor, baby.
I don't even know what that is.
Well, like, in the absence of evidence, usually the easiest or most simplest answer is the correct answer.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Merriam-Webster. When Charlie's family learns that the police found his car, but not him, they knew something was very wrong. Why would Charlie have left without his car? It's the middle of October in New England. It's cold and rainy around this time. Where would he have gone? Well, the story begins to get even weirder. Police discover that on Friday, October 12th, very early in the morning, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., there was a break-in at a woman's second-floor apartment in a house that's not too far from the UMass Dartmouth campus. The woman told police that a young man had climbed through her apartment window and proceeded to wake her. She was startled, but I guess the young man was very nice and polite to her. She noted that he was only wearing pants. He had no shirt or shoes on. According to her statement, he apologized and said he was just looking for his friends and left through the same window he came in through. And this friend he told her he was looking for? Yeah, his name's Mason.
Geez, did this lady have a full-blown conversation with him? I feel like if it was you would have kicked an intruder back out the window they came in through.
Right? But I have a lot of questions. First of all, why is this person trying to get into their friend's house through a second floor window?
This makes me think of Clarissa Explains It All. This is probably before your time, but she used to have a friend that came up in through a window.
Like, is this the only way the person came into their house?
Strangely enough, I think it was. I had looked at information about this for some reason. And I think the director thought that it was an easy way and a quick way to get her friend into the episode and into her room without having to have a bunch of other moving parts to it.
Maybe that's why the show is no longer on the air. My second question, though, is how is this woman not absolutely freaking out when she sees an intruder coming through her window? And I'll say this over and over again, but why the hell is the window unlocked? I do not care what the weather is. Your window should always be locked. And I mean, I know anyone can get in through a window if it's locked, but come on, safety first. At least have one line of defense.
It's funny because your mind goes that way, and I'm over here thinking, why isn't this person wearing a shirt or shoes?
Right, I know. It's October. I mean, it's not hypothermia cold, but shit, I'd be freezing my booty off. And the thing that makes this info so important, though, is that this intruder was looking for a friend, and that friend's named Mason. Come on, that can't be a coincidence.
Yeah, no way. This person had to be Charlie.
I agree. And we know that Charlie was supposed to be meeting with Mason around 8:30 p.m. on the 11th. And now this is happening, 6 to 8 hours later? So what could have happened in this time period?
Yeah, I don't know. We were just talking about how his car was found and it had a pillow and a blanket in there. Maybe he was taking a nap in his car and,
True.
Was going to go meet up with Mason after that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Well, the young woman goes on to describe a man that looks exactly like Charlie. Couple that with the police later finding Charlie's sneakers in the woods near her apartment, I think it's safe to say we have a confirmed sighting of him. And also, just to throw it out there, Charlie did know where Mason lived, so why would he be looking for him in some woman's house that's literally 30 minutes away from Mason's place? It's just so strange and doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, my mind immediately goes to some type of drug-induced episode or maybe a mental break. Something must have happened to Charlie before he disappeared. I mean, he dropped his backpack in some random person's yard and then, although it may not be 100% confirmed, he showed up breaking into some lady's house looking for Mason. It just doesn't sound like something a person of sound mind would do.
Well, that kind of leads into our next part, where Charlie's family went on to divulge some information that may make this all start to make a little more sense. But before I get into it, I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll take all the evidence that comes forward and use that to formulate your theory for what happened to Charlie. Don't rest your reasoning on this one sole piece of information. Listen to the rest of the story before making a decision on what you think happened. Okay? Good. So, Charlie Allen Jr. was diagnosed with bipolar disorder back in high school. He'd seen a therapist for a while and ended up taking mood stabilizers for a number of years. According to his dad, Charlie had stopped taking his meds the summer before he vanished. His sister had told the producers of Disappeared that her brother told her the pills made him feel dead inside, that he couldn't physically feel happy or sad. I can totally understand why he wouldn't want to stay on this medication, especially if it made him feel that way. His family said that he was doing really well, though, after coming off the medication, that he was working on his physical health and that was really helping with his mental health. I've been there, done that with my own struggles. 100%, if you're eating right, exercising, and overall just taking care of yourself, you can definitely get to a much better place mentally. It makes me happy to know he was able to do that. Though he was working towards a better state of mind, Charlie's family would go on to state that he did still have the occasional episode, They said he would talk really fast and just go on and on whenever he was on the verge of a manic episode, but it usually had a long buildup. He wouldn't just snap. His mother said it would usually take a few days or weeks to get to that point. And I mean, I believe them. His family knows him best. I think it's so difficult to hide certain mental health issues from your loved ones. I know if I were to up and leave right now, my loved ones wouldn't think it had anything to do with my mental health. They can tell when I'm good and when I'm not, and it's hard to hide that from someone you live with or spend all your time with.
Yeah, I agree with the aspect that his family would know him best, but I could also understand if Charlie's friends didn't notice anything. They probably didn't even know he had underlying issues. Now, I think it's important to be understanding when dealing with a case involving someone with mental illness. You don't want to blame whatever the problem is on it, but you also can't let your sympathy for their situation blind you to it being a possible contributing factor.
100%. I totally agree with that. And that's why I wanted you and everyone else I'm telling this story to take the information with a grain of salt. It absolutely does fit into our story, but it's not the only factor. And honestly, there's so much we don't know that coming to this one conclusion just feels wrong in some sense.
Okay, well, I will keep an open mind going forward, and we'll see where it leads us.
So, I'm sure you can guess at this point that authorities believe that Charlie's disappearance has something to do with his mental illness. To this day, they've stated that they do not think there were any signs of foul play, but how can you say that? Did police even look into the supposed people that were after him? Or did they just write that off too, blaming it on his mental illness? Yeah, he only brought it up that one time to Brittany, but she is certain he was scared of whoever was after him.
Yeah, it should be important to look into it. I mean, if you couple that statement with the fact that his social media was deleted, even if he denied doing it himself, it looks like he could be trying to cover his tracks to run away. He very well could have wiped his computer to make it harder for investigators to find him or locate any information regarding those messages.
That's a definite possibility, but wouldn't you think they'd be checking into everything? Could there be something they aren't telling us? Like, do they know more than they're letting on? What could they have that could potentially harm the investigation at this point? It's so many years later, so honestly, what is the harm?
I don't know. I don't think there's any point in hiding anything. I mean, as of right now, it doesn't seem like there's a crime involved. It's a missing person, so you would think that they would want to put everything out there. That way, the people that are helping look for him know everything that's going on.
Well, that brings me to our next point. The police did search his computer, and it seemed like there was nothing on there that would lead them to any new conclusion other than the one that they were set on, that Charlie's mental illness was to blame.
Did they check for the emails?
They did, and it looked like the in and out boxes were completely wiped clean. So maybe this is like you thought, that he's trying to cover his tracks, but I'm still confused. I would assume that this is a tech specialist that is reviewing the computer, so are you telling me that they have no way of finding deleted emails? I mean, I honestly find that really hard to believe.
Yeah, that does sound strange. I'm sure in this case they could probably contact the email service and subpoena the records much like they would with phone records.
Right? Well, it doesn't even seem like they did. And the only thing of interest that they even find on his computer is the fact that he visited the website for the University of Texas. I mean, Charlie was a senior at Dartmouth, and he did mention he wanted to go to medical school after. So I guess maybe you can come to the conclusion that he was just looking at another college?
I mean, I guess it's a possibility.
Well, there's a tidbit of information I didn't tell you earlier that makes this more interesting. After Charlie had talked to Brittany and brought up that weird comment about all the answers being in the periodic table, he'd also left voicemails for both of his parents. In those voicemails, he mentioned in one that he wanted to go to Texas and the other that he wanted to go to Florida. Well, that makes me think right there, okay, this is connected. But I just can't figure out why or how. Police did their due diligence with this piece of information. They got in contact with the University of Texas to see if they had any record of Charlie, which, unfortunately, they did not, and investigators' leads dried up at this point.
So we can link the Texas comment with the search for the University of Texas, but why would he be going to Florida?
There's some speculation it's because FL, like the abbreviation for Florida, is on the periodic table, but it doesn't really seem like that goes anywhere. I think it might have something to do with the fact of Mason having gone to those tennis academies in Florida. And I don't know, maybe Charlie mentioned it because he was interested in going to one of them. I know it's kind of a long shot, but I think it's a potential connection. Either way.
All right, that could be a link. But with leads drying up, where are we at now?
Authorities wholeheartedly believe that Charlie left of his own free will and that it's his mental illness that contributed to that. But with more evidence that they collect, it really made investigators lean into that theory heavily. And we find out that just a month before Charlie disappeared, he changed his name.
What, like he started going by another name? Or he legally changed it?
No. He legally changed it. Like, got his driver's license updated, the works. He wasn't messing around. So, police think maybe he did have this planned, that he wanted to leave his life behind, and now this name change is just the icing on the cake. Charlie's new name is Neo Babson Maximus. I'm sure you're all thinking what I'm thinking. What? What does that even mean? Well, when I was telling John about this case, he totally knew exactly where half of this name came from.
Of course I do. I mean, I'm full of useless information, like we said before. Neo from The Matrix. So then when you start thinking like early 2000s pop culture, Maximus had to be from Gladiator. You know, my name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix legions, loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
Oh my God, what just happened?
Sorry.
Okay, kind of weird that you knew all that, but you're right.
The only one that I don't know is Babson.
Well, that's because it's a family name. So it's important to know that Charlie changed his name, but I'm going to continue referring to him as Charlie because that's what everyone who knew and loved him knew him as. Just a few weeks after Charlie disappeared, a man would come forward with a promising tip. He told police that he had witnessed a young man catching a ride with a trucker in the area of Route 6 in Dartmouth. He said the man wasn't wearing a shirt, looked very dirty, and just overall unkempt.
So maybe he was hitching a ride with the driver of like an 18-wheeler or something? It'd probably get him pretty far.
Yeah, it seems that way. But because this man didn't know for sure if it was Charlie, he kept driving. He brought the tip to police's attention later when Charlie's case started to be discussed in and around town. The police are considering the idea that maybe Charlie had really wanted to leave, and that even though he had a rough night when he broke into that woman's window, maybe he'd come to his senses and made the decision to get out of town.
If he was really worried about people coming after him, it seems like a decent way to get somewhere else with few people knowing. There'd be no trace of him other than the person driving him and whatever people saw him at the time that he got into the truck.
I don't know. I can see why people are thinking he made this decision, but I mean, if it were me, I'd probably have things planned out a little more thoroughly. Like, if I were leaving my car on campus, I'd have like a go bag in there. And I'd get a prepaid cell phone and take out a bunch of cash so my cards can't be traced. But like in this situation, Charlie's seen half naked, breaking into someone's house, and then his backpack and shoes are found in someone's yard and then in the woods. Like, it doesn't seem that all of this was planned out if that's what the plan was here.
And that's why I think it may have had something to do with like a mental break or a drug-induced episode. But then on the other side of it, you got to think if he really thought that these people were after him and that they were, you know, a serious threat, that he just wanted to really quickly get out of town before anything could happen.
Yeah, those are definitely both good possibilities, but I just don't think we have enough info here to really go on to know for sure. Once police looked into this tip, nothing really came of it and things would start to go stale. For several months after Charlie goes missing, police continue to receive information, but as his case fades from the spotlight, tips start to slow down. Police would still try their best and search nearby areas and even check out homeless shelters in and around town, but would always come up empty-handed. By the end of 2007, the family is becoming frustrated with the lack of movement in the case, and as others in their shoes have before, they hire their own private investigator, John Laseze. Lasese takes on Charlie's case pro bono, and as he investigates the mysterious disappearance, he decides that it's possible Charlie could still be in the woods where he was seen running towards after breaking into that woman's apartment. Even though that tip came in from the guy who saw a shirtless young man heading towards 18-wheelers, it doesn't mean that it was Charlie, and they needed to ensure he hadn't perished in the woods, especially considering the fact that his sneakers had been found near that area as well. The location they would search was about a 4-square-mile radius through the woods around the UMass Dartmouth campus. According to the Disappeared episode referenced earlier, this was the largest civilian-run search in New England at the time. I know I keep saying this, but I just find it so odd that we literally live around here and never heard about this when it was happening. The biggest civilian search in the area wasn't publicized like crazy? I just don't get it. I mean, I was young in 2007, like 13 years old, so maybe that's why I hadn't or don't remember having heard of anything. But John, you graduated high school 2 years earlier. You were like, what, 19? So you were close to Charlie's age, and even you didn't hear anything about this.
Nah, nothing that sticks out to me, but I wasn't that big into the news back then. You know, now as a sophisticated adult, I need to stay in the know.
Haha, yes, so sophisticated. Volunteers would search the woods for 3 days when they stumbled across something unsettling. Bones. The family was worried sick once they heard this news. To make things even worse, they'd be forced to wait a brutal 24 hours before getting any answers. Once they were notified, they were told that the bones belonged to an animal. Phew. At least they still had hope at this point. Hope that Charlie is still out there somewhere, and he hadn't died in the woods that fateful night he went missing. Searchers would continue scouring the area to try and find anything belonging to Charlie or something leading them in some sort of direction of where he might be. Sadly, they were unsuccessful. Something I found interesting that was said by the family's PI is that he wholeheartedly believes that Charlie is not in those woods. I think it's pretty crazy that he's so confident about that. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time remains were found years later after the area was searched thoroughly. There are apparently very thick woods in some areas, and to completely ensure you've gone through every single bit of woods in such a short time isn't really possible in my mind. And for all we know, if someone had been after him and had killed him, they could have buried him. You can't guarantee you would find something like that in a search done by volunteers without certain technologies that could check for anything buried in the area.
I don't know. I tend to side with the PI in this case. If there were people actually after Charlie, I wouldn't think that they were so close by that they would have anything to do with his disappearance. If he had died in those woods, I would have to believe it was probably because of lack of clothing or being lost in cold weather. What do you think?
I'm not entirely sure what I believe, but I don't know. I can't guarantee that he didn't die in those woods, whether it be from exposure or something more sinister. As years go by, the family is obviously disheartened and, of course, frustrated. There's been no new updates in the search for Charlie, but they would soon be filled with a renewed sense of hope. In December of 2009, police receive a new tip, and it feels like something of substance. They believe they have a sighting of Charlie 2 years later. And strangely enough, the sighting is in Massachusetts, just 11 miles away from the UMass Dartmouth campus. A man named Stephen Kelly would experience a strange encounter in the middle of the night when he and his wife heard a knock on their door. His wife, obviously freaked out, didn't want him to go check who it was, and, lady, I'm with you. Hell no. I am not going to the door at 4 a.m. to see what's up. My ass is checking that Ring camera and talking through it and saying, "Hello, sir or madam. Please leave my house, thank you."
Or you're waking me up to go look.
Yup. And just like you, Stephen is a ballsy guy, so he heads down to answer the door. And I mentioned before, but I want to reiterate, it's December. It's cold in Massachusetts in December. Well, when Stephen answers the door, there's a young man that he said absolutely does not look like he's dressed for the freezing cold temps in the area. He states that the young man asked him for directions to SMU, which is what they used to call UMass Dartmouth back in the day, up until around 1991. What? Why would this kid be asking about a college known as SMU? It hasn't been called that for decades. I'm lost.
I'm so confused. Has Charlie been creeping around this same area all this time, unbeknownst to all these people looking for him?
I am right there with you. I can't make heads or tails of it. Well, Stephen would then call police for assistance, but by the time they arrive, the young man has fled. When asked, Stephen confirms that the man who came to his door that night was Charlie Allen Jr. He even goes as far to say he's nearly 100% sure it was him. I mean, that's pretty confident if you ask me. But if it was Charlie, where had he been for the last 2 years? And why the heck was he asking for directions to SMU, a college that he attended, that they called UMass Dartmouth, not SMU? I don't get it. I feel like the story just keeps getting more and more bizarre as time goes on. This would be the last relevant tip that came in until January of 2021, when a skull was found on Little Beach on Horseback Road in Dartmouth. Authorities believe it to be the skull of a young adult male. The cause of death is unknown, and it seems as of November 2021, no information about who that skull belonged to has been posted anywhere. Police did make note, though, that they believe the skull washed up on shore, not that it was placed there. So, essentially, it could have come from anywhere else on the coast.
There's a good possibility that this skull has nothing to do with Charlie, and it could have washed up from decades or even centuries ago. I'm sure they're trying to work on some type of DNA to test on it, but of course, stuff takes time.
Yeah, I definitely lean towards that option as well. I truly, deeply hope that the skull doesn't belong to Charlie Allen. I like to think that he just up and left his life behind for whatever unknown reason, and maybe one day when he feels safe, he'll return to his family. I can't say for sure what I believe actually happened. As we wrap up this case today, I have to say I'm still pretty undecided. This case is so wild, and I just wish we had more information. Ever since 2011, when this Disappeared episode was aired, this case doesn't seem to get the attention I feel it deserves. It's been 14 years since Charlie Allen Jr. went missing, and his family is still searching for answers. They are steadfast in their belief that Charlie did not leave of his own free will, that he would never leave his life behind. His family was quoted saying that he had goals, loved his apartment, was enjoying school, and was obsessed with his newfound passion of tennis. Why would he ever leave when he had so much going for him and so much to live for? And his family is also certain that his mental illness would not be what caused him to leave, if that's the case. I see so many people on Reddit threads out in the world throwing the family under the bus and saying that they're delusional or refuse to see what's right in front of them, but that really frustrates me to hear. Not enough people have compassion for those who are struggling with a mental illness or for the families dealing with their loss. I could never imagine what Charlie's family has gone through, but I can understand why they believe what they believe. They know Charlie better than any of us. They were a super close-knit family. They talked all the time. Brittany and Charlie were practically Irish twins, and so close they would tell each other everything. Brittany mentioned one thing that really stuck with me in the interview she did for Disappeared. She said that she felt as though once people hear the fact that Charlie was diagnosed as bipolar, that's the route they just follow. They think, oh yeah, he was mentally ill, so he must have just run away. But it's unfair to think like that. Every single person in this world is different and deals with mental health in a different way. That's why I wanted you to promise not to just take the info about Charlie having bipolar disorder at face value and use that as a blanket reason for his disappearance, because there is so much more to his story. I feel like I have so many questions that are left unanswered, and I have a strong belief that the police know more than they're letting on. That there's more out there that we haven't been made aware of that could potentially be harmful to release to the public. What's going on with Charlie's computer? He supposedly lived on it, did everything on it. How was there not more found on there? How is it that they only found one website of any relevance, that of the University of Texas? What about those emails? Did they check on the deactivation of his Facebook account? Is it possible to trace the IP address of where it was disabled from? We live in this area and know that a lot of our listeners do too. So if you can think back, if you were in or around the Dartmouth area in 2007, did you see something? Hear something? Did someone mention something in passing about a kid that went missing from UMass Dartmouth? Rack your brain for any information you can think of. And if you can think of anything, no matter how small, please contact the Massachusetts State Police at 508-820-2300. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.